our next HU talk. We have Dr. Jennifer Lindline. Before we get started, I just want to invite you guys to a lot of different events going on this week. If you are physically in town, feel free to come by the Cowboy Lounge. You can purchase tickets for those on nmhufoundation.org. The game starts at noon at 1 o'clock on Saturday. Tailgating and everything is good to go. So we look forward to seeing everybody this weekend. Without further ado, I'll let Dr. Lindline go ahead and start her talk.
Hey there. Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Shanna, and thank you, Julie Solomon and Julie Tumblety for organizing this or for inviting me to speak with this HU talk series. I'm very pleased to talk to this Highlands Cowboy crowd and to see so many familiar faces. My gosh, seeing Adam and Amanda and Danny and Kate and so many others, you guys are making me feel loved. So thank you. And you're helping to diminish my nerves a little bit. So it's my pleasure to be able to be here, to be able to share my experience with you of living in the shadows of the Hermits Peak, Calf Canyon wildfire and its aftermath. And in particular, I'm most happy to share with you what my students and I have been doing to respond to the situation and to better understand its impacts to water quality and water quantity in our regional watersheds. And I'll end today with sharing some of my thoughts and how our community can move forward with building resiliency into its water resource, into its water portfolio. Okay, so I guess I should share my screen. All right, there we go. Okay, so until this summer, and at the risk of showing my age, I always thought of Earth, Wind, and Fire as a 70s rock band. And I'm kind of stealing that from my colleague, Orit Tamir. But during the spring and summer of this year, those words got a whole new meaning in northern New Mexico. My home, our Querencia. It just all changed after the April 6th Hermits Peak prescribed fire merged with the Calf Canyon pile burn holdover and erupted into the state's largest and most destructive forest fire in our history. The region's multi-year drought, the unprecedented spring winds, and the persistent red flag warning days all contributed to the fire combustion. And all of it contributed to that greater than 300,000 acre burn area, transforming the biotic and sociocultural environment of northern New Mexico and its watersheds, whose services are so critical to the community's lives and livelihoods. We watched with worry, but we acted quickly. We packed up family treasures, we checked in with loved ones, and we transitioned to online learning. We organized donation drives, we cleared our homes of leaves, debris, and combustible materials. We calmed our children and talked to loved ones near and far and told them that we were going to be okay. And we hoped that we would. We prayed that we would. But we prayed more so for the firefighters and all the emergency responders that put themselves into harm's way, protecting our homes, protecting our watersheds, protecting our regions, everything that our communities depend on so heavily for those ecosystem services, the economic benefits, and their health values, both physical and mental, to all of us and to all of our communities. The series of photos that I was showing you are ones that I was taken from my backyard as the days passed and the fire came over the divide that separated the Gallinas watershed from the Upper Pecos watershed, and it inched closer to my home. So let's talk about the size. The Hermits Peak Calf Canyon fire size as posted by the Incident Information System, came to 341,735 acres. The size of this was just unimaginable. It was crazy to think as the days progressed that something was impacting my colleagues here in the Las Vegas city proper. And we're also impacting my colleague and friend, Dr. Benson, over in San Geronimo and Mineral Hill, and students in Buena Vista, students in Mora, students in Southern Taos County. Everybody was affected by this, including myself on the other side of the divide in Pecos. The soil burn severity, as posted by the Burn Area Emergency Response Team, had a variety of categories, from very low to moderate and high. When we're talking about the very low and the low categories, those areas that show up in the dark green and the muted green, those areas are ones in which the forest litter, the twigs, the different organic debris and pine needles, they were burned, but they're still recognizable, and they still kind of stay where they lay. The soil structure was predominantly intact, and water is still able to penetrate the subsurface and infiltrate and be absorbed. As we get up into the higher soil burn severity categories, we're getting into categories that saw higher tree mortality and just a more intense burn that did impact the soil structure. And that is roots, trunks beneath the surface burned. And that is that the structure itself was no longer intact, and the soil transformed into something organic and something that was an anchor to vegetation that now no longer had any of that anchoring capacity, nor rainwater or precipitation infiltration capacity, and rather everything was loose. And so those higher burn categories also correspond to areas that were more susceptible to erosion. Let's talk about watersheds. So I kind of put that map onto this map that was produced by the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute, showing our state's major watersheds. Look at the size of the Hermits Peak Half Canyon fire relative to the state, and you can again be impressed by its overall size. And we'll think about the watersheds that were impacted as I take that away. The Hermits Peak Half Canyon fire impacted areas of both the Upper Rio Grande, the Upper Canadian, as well as the Upper Pecos watershed. Its footprint impacted in the Upper Pecos watershed, portions of the Rio Mora, the headwaters Cow Creek, Bull Creek, Apache Creek, and Manzanares Pecos Canyon were all impacted. In the Guayanus Canyon towards the east, Tecolote Creek, Barrow Creek, Beaver Creek, Hollinger Creek, and Porvenir Creeks were all impacted by the wildfire. Now, depending on where a fire hits in a watershed, there's going to be different kinds of short and long-term impacts. When a forest fire hits the headwaters of a watershed, that's where we can expect watershed scale disturbances. This is a picture taken from Route 518 looking south of Mora. We can see the broad extent of the fire and its burn footprint. When a forest fire hits more in the midwaters, then we're more so concerned about fishing, agriculture, recreation, as well as the communities that reside in those midwater areas. When a forest fire hits in the low waters, that's when we're concerned about drinking water supplies, agricultural regions, as well as industrial water uses. Now, whether all or parts of an upper region of a watershed are classified as high, medium, or low burn severity, there is going to be some degree of fire sedimentation, ash and debris that are going to enter the watershed. There will also be a degree of hillside erosion, a change of the landscape or the geomorphology. There's an expectations of floods. When you no longer have that water holding capacity, you expect a greater degree of surface water runoff, floods intensity and flood frequency. Of course, you expect landslides, just mass wasting, a destabilization of the hillsides, and that loss of materials from the sides. And I feel funny telling all you guys this because I know that the majority of people in this room are experiencing it. They are living this. We are living this. So today I want to talk about two watersheds, both the Upper Pecos watershed and the Guyanus watershed. I've got this picture and I've embedded it in a lot of my subsequent slides, but I want to share. I'm mostly talking about this area here, the Upper Pecos watershed portion of the Pecos watershed and the Guyanus watershed. Now, the Upper Pecos watershed, this region here, its headwaters are in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and it runs to its outflow to the southern high plains below the Pecos River's confluence with Cow Creek and El Rito. It descends about 4,000 or 5,000 feet in elevation. The Guyanus water, too, its headwaters are in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains up by Elk Mountain, and it too moves through the mountains as it enters into the lowlands into the Great Plains physiographic province. Both of these are sub-watersheds of the Pecos watershed. Both of these include forests, rangelands, farmlands, and dispersed residential development. And both of these support rich traditions of farming, ranching, and other long-standing uses, all of which depend on a continuous supply of clean water. So the Pecos, the Upper Pecos River, it's an iconic New Mexico waterway. It sustains the local agricultural community. It provides exceptional recreational opportunity, and it has many diverse and rich ecological values. These waters are among some of New Mexico's most rich and most outstanding aquatic resources for people, plants, and animals alike. It's one of the most aesthetically beautiful and recreated on streams in the state. A friend of mine, a colleague of mine, Ralph Hill, he's the owner of an organic farm, Molina de la Isla Organics, and his family's been in this region for generations. To him, the Upper Pecos River, it's a special and a sacred place. He quoted in a publication of the New Mexico Acequia Association, "Our watersheds are extremely important to a lot of our traditional communities in New Mexico. The health of that watershed is vital. If we don't have healthy watersheds, we don't have healthy communities beneath them." Last year, a group of local government and conservationists, including myself, created a petition for New Mexico's Water Quality Control Commission to list the Upper Pecos watershed and several others as an outstanding national resource water, ONRW designation. And this is some of the highest level of protections against water quality degradation that the state can give. It preserves the cleanliness of water while allowing some of the existing and traditional uses. I testified at a hearing with the Water Quality Control Commission on an afternoon where my office windows were shaking from the demonic winds last spring, and right around the time that the that the fires just started in the Hermits Peak area. But it was in mid-July of this year, while the firefighters worked to contain the fire lines and to manage the fire sedimentation, that the New Mexico Water Quality Control Commission granted that designation. They unanimously passed the outstanding national resources waters for the Upper Pecos watershed, recognizing its significant ecological value. So we're thinking about the fires and their impacts: sedimentation, erosion, landslides and floods. Speaking of Pecos, and this is a Google map image of the village of Pecos and its surroundings. All of Pecos's drinking water supply is sourced in groundwater. Over here, I put a green dot on the main wells that supply the village of Pecos, and whether it's that or the various hundreds of individual or community wells that support its citizens. Drinking water supplies were not directly impacted by the Hermits Peak Calf Canyon fire. The diminished infiltration in the upper Pecos watershed and the reduced floodplain storage in the Midlands surely negatively impacted aquifer recharge, something to think about in the long term. Another thing that I repeatedly get calls about is bacteria and compromising of folks' wells. And it's a threat to drinking water supplies, that possibility of E. coli and other enteric microorganisms entering into drinking water supplies. A handful of years ago, a natural resources management graduate student conducted a study and documented that enteric microorganisms are transported at higher concentrations during storm runoff events than during baseflow conditions. So it's reasonable to ask the question, can these microorganisms get into domestic supplies? The answer is yes, especially during these high rainfall events, high discharge events, when the heads of domestic wells are submerged underneath those floodwaters. Homeowners must be diligent to convey floodwaters around there, kind of modify their land surface on water flow to make sure that that water flows away from the wellhead, and they need to monitor persistently for the presence of bacteria. The New Mexico Environment Department just this week implemented a activity or an effort to help homeowners in that regard. And in their Las Vegas field station, they're handing out kits. There's pickup and drop-off points so that people can be diligent about that monitoring. Homeowners have to be active in that, and we at New Mexico Highlands University have to be as helpful as we can in conveying that information. The Upper Pecos River, though, it's more than a drinking water supply. It's an iconic river. It holds extraordinary ecological significance. It's designated by the New Mexico Environment Department as a high-quality cold water fishery. It holds one of the last populations and a native population of Rio Grande cutthroat trout. Without adequate supplies of cold, high-quality water, that population is threatened. I am very pleased to share two of my favorite students and favorite people in the world, Megan Begay and Letitia Mailboy. They have been active for a number of years since they're coming to New Mexico Highlands University as undergraduate students in monitoring the Upper Pecos River for its meeting of its high-quality cold water standards. They engaged in a study back in February of 2020 to monitor base flow conditions and track numerical values and trends. And they've been using a portable field meter to look at parameters like pH, temperature, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, and conductivity to assess that situation. They were one of the two individuals that reached out and asked for, how can we help? How can we help now in the times of these, while the fire was burning in the weeks since then, to assess and monitor for water quality impacts. They took on internships this summer with New Mexico Highlands University through a grant that we have with the U.S. Department of Agriculture to learn water science techniques and towards preparations for water resources scientists. These are just some of the pictures that we took over the summer from June, July through August. In June, The waters were clarified. We could see to the bottom, to our feet, or to the bottom of our waders, but you can see here that there were pieces of soot or particles of charcoal that were coming down the watershed. With each precipitation event and heavier rains, that water got more muddy, more turbid from July through August, bringing down larger and thicker and more concentrated fire debris. Going back to Letitia and Megan's study, so I said they were monitoring the river for 18 months from February 2020 to July 2021 for all of these different standards. And the conclusion of their study at the end of the summer 2021 was that, yes, the Upper Pecos River is a high quality cold water fishery. And for most days out of the year, throughout different precipitation events and high flow events, it rarely to never exceeds the various water quality standards. This is a graph from Megan and Letitia's report to the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute, where they demonstrated out of, I think this is greater than 150 days of monitoring, there were only a handful of days where this value, turbidity, exceeded the 10 NTUs water quality standard. And each of those was correlated to rain or runoff events. Contrast that with this summer. This summer, as the rains came and the material came down slope, this summer of 2022, they were monitoring weekly. And I tried to keep the y-axis the same in both of these figures. And in most of the days, excepting one, the values were exceeding the 10 NTUs, and not just exceeding, but exceeding by in some days more than 10 times the water quality standards. Off the chart, greater than 10, greater than 100, greater than 1,000. I think the one day we were upwards of 4,000 NTUs. Dissolved oxygen was another parameter that they monitored diligently. And in February 2020 to July 2021, a healthy stream, a stream that can support its cold water, high quality cold water fisheries designation, has a dissolved oxygen value of 6 milligrams per liter or higher. And you see that over their 18 months, the Upper Pecos River during that study only went below that threshold a handful of times. And they were days that the base flow was quite low and temperatures were high, which diminished the river's oxygen carrying capacity. And again, contrast that with this summer, where just about all of the days the river exceeded or didn't meet its 6 milligrams per liter dissolved oxygen value. And I'll just say, in just about all of these parameters, all departed from baseline values, and we were finding that the Upper Pecos River was troubled. Most of this trouble came with the floods, came with high precipitation events. This river is really flashy in its response to precipitation. And in these days since those last heavy rains, the water is clearing again, and we are seeing a clarification to its turbidity values and a return to dissolved oxygen and other water quality parameters. So one of the things that had been absent from our study in the last 18 months and this summer was an integrated study that just doesn't look at physical parameters and chemical parameters, but also includes biological parameters. There's a lot of ways in which the biology of your stream can share or impart knowledge about its health, in particular, macroinvertebrates, benthic macroinvertebrates, those bottom-dwelling, visible, organisms that can just share something about its health. If the habitat is good and that high quality is preserved, there's various species and diversities of species that scientists can expect to see. Certain bioindicators of watershed health, well, there's some that have a low tolerance, things like stonefly nymphs, They don't like pollution. They don't like sedimentation. They don't like unclarified waters. They want that high quality, clear, high oxygen waters. Got a handful of organisms like mayfly nymphs, caddisfly, and riffle beetles that can take some pollution. They can take some of disruption to their habitat. They're kind of moderate in there in terms of their tolerance to pollution or habitat disturbance. And you've got others that have a high tolerance. Doesn't matter how much stuff's coming downstream, what that chemical or sediment load is, they're okay. The midge larvae, the scuds, and other kinds of organisms. So depending on the numbers and the diversity of organisms you see, you can have a measure of your watershed's health. I'm proud to say that I've recently engaged with a project with my colleague, Dr. Sebastian Medina, in the biology department at New Mexico Highlands University, along with Letitia and Megan and a new student, Kenneth Romero, in developing a comparative study between the Upper Pecos watershed and the Guyanus watershed, 6 weeks out of the containment of the Hermits Peak Half Canyon fire, to see if and how both systems are responding. Are they healthy? And we've developed comparative sites in terms of their lengths along the stream or the stream reach and the numbers of times that we're going out to collect the macro invertebrates. Now, this study is going to take a little while because these bags are full of organic debris and other things that take some laboratory processing. Here's a picture of Kenneth sitting in the water science laboratory at Highlands, separating out the different benthic macro invertebrates and working towards identifying the types and numbers. But like I said, this is going to take some time. Folks are calling me up all the time from Pecos and Las Vegas. Hey, what are the macro invertebrates telling you? And we're looking towards Thanksgiving or Christmas to be able to come up with some values. But it is an important part to this integrated study of watershed health. The expected results, they're going to include a data set of macroinvertebrates from the Upper Pecos River and the Guyanus River collected over the 6 weeks period following that containment. The data collection experience is already proving immeasurable to the students, Kenneth, Megan, and Letitia. They're learning about project design, preparation of documentation, field and laboratory protocols, sample processing, data collection, and data set management. And the data set's going to be invaluable to the communities of Upper Pecos and Guyanus to just understand if and how much each stream was impacted by the fire. The information will be used to make recommendations for stream restoration efforts or additional studies to document the length of the impairment and or its recovery. So speaking about the Guyanus River, the headwaters Guyanus, just like the Upper Pecos, are just so beautiful and majestic. They too qualify as high quality cold water fisheries. And with that, they too need to meet certain water quality designations to support that designation, to support the aquatic habitat, the riparian zones, as well as the other kinds of uses, agriculture and domestic uses in that headwaters Guyanus region. Nobody was regularly monitoring for the various parameters that Megan, Letitia, and I had been. But recently, the U.S. Geological Survey has added that to their regular monitoring. These are two hydrographs or data sets that show turbidity in the upper diagram and dissolved oxygen in the lower diagram for the period June 1st to September 1st. Like I said, the USGS kind of only started this at about early August of this year. But without paying attention to the values, you can see that there was a big spike in turbidity at some point of the USGS monitoring station of Guyanus Creek near Montezuma. And you've also got these oscillations. All of these values, if we do pay attention to the numbers over here, are well over that 10. that 10 value that's critical for maintaining a clarified stream. Look at the figure below. When we look at dissolved oxygen, similar to the Upper Pecos River, you want a stream that has a healthy amount of dissolved oxygen at 6 milligrams per liter or above, and the Guyanus Creek was maintaining that. But you see, in some places you've got some oscillations, and some places it's kind of, yeah, there's places where it's been compromised. So this is something that we want to pay attention to, and we'll be collecting the suite of physical and chemical parameters along with collection of the benthic macroinvertebrates to try to look at each of those and to correlate the values with the numbers and trends in species. So when we're talking about the Las Vegas waters, so the Headwaters Guyanus is qualified as high quality cold water fishery. But remember, the Guyanus River supplies not just its valuable ecology and tourism and recreation opportunities, it also provides almost 90% of the city of Las Vegas and its 13,000 residents and all who depend upon it, like New Mexico Highlands University, for its drinking water supply. So when we're in times of drought or in times of water fouling, like this current event, it puts all who depend and thrive in the Las Vegas community at risk. So let's take a moment to look at the city's water system infrastructure. This is a map that I got from Glorietta Geosciences. So, and it shows the Guyanus River just about, here's the skating pond, but that USGS gauging station where those real-time data sets are being collected is just about here in the lower Guyanus Canyon. Then we've got the city diversion. This is where the city pulls water off of Guyanus River and moves it over to the sediment basin. The sediment basin is where, through gravity, some of the sediment, some of the heavies are settled out and the water becomes more clarified. Well, and again, that's mostly through gravity. Water is then pumped to the city's reservoirs, the Peterson and the Bradner reservoirs, before it's taken from those reservoirs, treated at the water treatment plant for delivery to the city for its drinking water supplies. Now, we often only hear kind of bummer things about the city of Las Vegas and things that kind of put us in jeopardy or kind of threaten our strength or threaten our community. But I just wanted to share the city's water situation actually had a big thing working in its favor. This is a side diversion. This is unlike a lot of other mountain water systems that exist throughout the state or just around the Rocky Mountains. With that side diversion, the city was able to keep its reservoirs clear of fire sedimentation. They didn't move material over to these reservoirs, so kept it free. Now, I understand there was a breach, so Peterson Reservoir was compromised, but Bradner Reservoir and Story Lake, that's supplemental reservoirs, they were primarily unscathed by all that fire sedimentation. Like I said, that's often not the case for mountain water systems. When Raton had its fire a handful of years ago, if the Santa Fe watershed ever experiences a fire in its watershed, back when Rio Doso had its Little Bear Creek fire, and even when Los Alamos had its fire, all of those rivers float directly into their city reservoirs. And so, yeah, after that 2012 Little Bear fire in Rio Doso, its drinking water supply was decimated. The 2000 and later 2013 fires in Los Alamos decimated, just destroyed their reservoirs. But in our situation this summer, Las Vegas's water supplies, except for that one breach, were left clean. We have a good, well thought out setup. So again, once those floods came, and this is a picture from Glorietta Geosciences, this is a flood over in Sebastian Canyon. This kind of material did not go into Bradner Reservoir or Story Lake because of our side diversion. We were able to protect our existing city's water infrastructure once all that sediment was coming down, because of a variety of team of specialists, including the Army Corps of Engineers, they worked zealously to protect that water infrastructure. They put down different gabions, those wire networks filled with rocks and concrete and different kind of earth material, and hay bales to kind of hold down the hillside and kind of protect from that sedimentation. These are two pictures that I took kind of in the lower and middle portions of the canyon, Sabinoso Canyon and another side canyon in Guyanus, where there was a lot of debris coming around. I mean, these canyons are often very well vegetated with little bits of water that trickles down. And not only did they have water, they had all of this debris. But these different geobrugs, this high tensile steel mesh and netting held back a lot of this debris, just like this sediment boom as well above the city's diversion, that floating barriers for containing silt and controlling turbidity. All of these things helped to control sedimentation, protect our city's water infrastructure. But nonetheless, when it comes to our diminishing water supplies, what we're experiencing this summer in the face of the fire sedimentation, it just isn't anything new. We've been hearing and waiting, kind of holding our breath, a lot of summers through low flow seasons, through dry seasons, seasons where the snowpack was low, sometimes when the snowpack was nil. Other times when fires kind of threatened up there. My first semester at New Mexico Highlands University in the summer of 2000, the Vivash fire threatened our city's water supply. So I have this quote from former Mayor Tony Marquez that he put in the city's 2009 Regional Drinking Water Action Plan under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. He said then, the regional drinking water supply shortages present the most immediate threat to our region's economic stability and quality of life. We've had a long need for money, a long need for funding, more than $1 million, more than tens of millions, many millions to improve our water's infrastructure and solve these chronic regional water shortages. And so speaking of water shortages, I just wanted to do a comparison again between the Upper Pecos River and the Guyanus River. These are two USGS gauging stations, one, the Pecos River near Pecos, New Mexico, and this one is the Guyanus Creek near Montezuma, that gauging station that was on the map a moment ago. Both of these are snapshots of how both rivers are flowing from June 1st to September 1st of this year. And we can see both rivers were having diminished flow in the early parts of the summer because both had low snowpack. And then we started seeing the river flows increasing in mid-June, going up, up, up. And we've got lots of spikes there with rainfall events during the 4th of July weekend and other punctuated events. So we see that these streams are flashy in their response. I more so want to call your attention to the median daily statistics. That gauging station in Pecos has been there for 95 years. So these triangles are showing us the median daily statistics for the summers for the past 95 years. The gauging station of the Guyanus Creek in Montezuma, same thing, 95 years. So not just this summer, not just this past decade, 95 years of record. Look at these records. I mean, one thing we can gather from these is that both streams often had higher stream flows in the early summer, still experiencing runoff from the snow melt from the late spring and into the summer. And then they would kind of return to base flow during those summer months. That's the normal behavior. And what is base flow? Look at the Pecos. Its base flow is up there in, I think it's about 70 cubic feet per second. 70 cubic feet per second to support the Upper Pecos River and all of its needs for fishing, agriculture, irrigation, livestock grazing, and recharge to the domestic wells. Look in contrast at the Guyanus. Drinking water supply to 13,000 plus residents. And that drinking water supply is coming from a base flow that hovers around 6 to 10 cubic feet per second every single summer over the last 95 years. Less than 10 cubic, or hovering around 10 cubic feet per second to supply its drinking water supply. What I'd like to do next is to offer some not so new ideas that need immediate action and some other kind of new ideas that warrant consideration if we're going to prepare for drought and disaster water resiliency. In our regions, or especially in the city of Las Vegas, the city needs to consider how to increase its surface water availability. And they are doing that. Over the last several years, they're doing a lot to reduce system losses. Around 2014 and 50, the city had drained some of its reservoirs to better improve their holding capacity and improve reservoir storage and recovery. Those kinds of reductions in system losses are critical. The city has to also look at increasing groundwater development. So if they get 90% of its drinking water supply from the river, they do have some additional supplies, and they're coming from the Taylor well field. But as the city water manager and others have said a handful of times during some of our debriefings, those wells are unreliable. Some of the water that they produce is high in total dissolved solids, and it's just not a reliable source. We need to do something else to increase that groundwater development. Do something with monitoring groundwater wells, better understand the effects of withdrawals on stream flow, and times that we do turn those wells on to supplement the city supply, quantify the timing and the extent of water table response so we can protect our surrounding neighbors and their groundwater supplies. Just identify the spatial extent of capture zones. All of that requires hydrologic surveys. They require getting out in the field and identifying where along stream reaches we can anticipate gains from groundwater or losses of streams to the subsurface. The city also has to consider diversifying its water supply portfolio. And how do you diversify your water supply portfolio is one thing, strengthening conservation initiatives. The city has long had conservation plans, and they do a lot with education, trying to promote conservation in the various hotels and restaurants and other sites of tourism to conserve. I know President Minner recently put together a task force of students, and that includes two natural resources management undergraduates, Madison Alcorn and August Allen, among several of their other peers throughout the university, to try to improve our own Highlands campus conservation initiatives, whether it's trifold brochures, video clips, or other kinds of educational initiatives, anything to get that word out, to stretch our water, to conserve our water, to use less and to save more. Another thing I'd like to mention, though, relatively new idea, is developing wastewater treatment and reuse. Like I said, the Taylor well field has never had the quality or the quantity to be a true backup system. The city needs a backup supply that meets peak demands. Direct wastewater reuse and indirect wastewater reuse that can and should become part of the calculus. The city's already using gray water on the golf course and other non-potable uses. Why not take this treatment to the next step? Instead of putting a Band-Aid on this long-term injury, why don't we do something to really heal that wound and make it so? You've got places in California, you've got El Paso, Texas, other regions that are exploring developing wastewater treatment and reuse. Las Vegas, New Mexico could be the first city in New Mexico to capitalize on that idea. You guys might have heard that term, toilet to tap. Some people call it showers to flowers. I call it strategic. I call it smart. I call it necessary at a time when we're experiencing drought with climate variability and when we need to prepare for and respond to disasters. Doing something to increase our water supply portfolio is key. And so the Natural Resources Management Department, what do we do to fill those needs? Well, I just wanted to share with you some of our degree programs. The Natural Resources Management Department offers a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Geology, and students can concentrate in environmental science, water resources, or geology. We also offer several minors, geology, GIS, and environmental science, as well as certificates in GIS at the undergraduate and graduate level, and a Master's of Science in Natural Sciences where students can concentrate their studies in geology or environmental science and management. Our students engage with the community. There's a picture of Letitia and Megan. They wrote proposals for, and that study that they did was funded through the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute, and they were working on monitoring the Upper Pecos River. Johnson had a similar grant, and he was working to study the quality of the Rio Mora. And then we've got Ryan Mann, who had a grant through the New Mexico Water Resources Research Institute. He did a study on the lower Santa Fe River that was integral to the city of Santa Fe as it's working to consider wastewater use and reuse. Ryan's study was looking at the city's the lower Santa Fe River's gains and losses, and shared that information so folks could identify areas, just to better understand the hydrologic budget. We do a lot with capacity building with grants from the USDA, the National Science Foundation, and others. We're increasing our benchtop capacity for doing water quality analysis, our in-stream water quality analysis. And Mike Petronis, Joe Zabrowski, and I recently garnered a grant from NSF for LiDAR instrumentation and building our hardware and software GIS capacities, drones and helicopters, and more. And partnerships. We work hard to build and cultivate partnerships with agencies like the Upper Pecos Watershed Association, the Hermits Peak Watershed Association, the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute, and other organizations. These are just key to being embedded in the communities, collecting those data, adding to the knowledge and improving the situation. So the hard work of the New Mexico of the Natural Resources Management Department faculty and students, and your ongoing support get us further at improving, maintaining, and protecting our watersheds and water supplies. And so I thank everybody and stand for questions.
Hello, Dr. Lindline.
Hey, Manuel.
How are you?
I'm well.
So now that you guys have been measuring the turbidity and the NTU levels and all of that, for the first few weeks of the monsoon, the city of Las Vegas was not diverting any water into Story Lake or Peterson Dam or Bradner Dam. And then it kept on raining. So you mentioned that the water cleans up a little bit. So I wrote a letter to the governor on August 22nd, telling her I was very concerned with 64 million gallons of water per day going down the Gajinas, and the city not capturing that either in Story Lake or Bradner Dam or Peterson Dam. That's when they were down to about 26 days of water left. So a day later, the state engineer came down, according to Maria McGivelry from the city, and she indicated that they're allowing them to draw water into Story Lake and perhaps someplace else. That's so important because without drawing water, we're going to run out of water in December. And,
right.
And I would rather have dirty, contaminated water to filter, since I'm a chemist, than to have no water at all. So I still haven't ascertained whether they're actually drawing the water, but it's going to be an emergency here very soon. So what do you know about that situation?
Well, thank you for that question. And I'm trying my hardest to keep on top of the news, but every day the news is changing. And So the good news is that the pre-treatment system to be able to draw water from Story Lake, treat it so that it can then be funneled into the regular water treatment plant, that all is up and running now with that $2.4 million funding. So that system's there, it's operational, it's tested, it's working. So that's why we're no longer at the 20 days, we're up to 30, and we're gaining in supplies every day. But you're also not wrong in the city of Las Vegas only has rights to a fraction of the water that's in Story Lake. And Bradner wasn't capturing any water coming off during the monsoon season. So we are going to find ourselves, I'm not going to say back in that critical state. We hope that that's not going to be the case. We're hoping for some late summer, early fall rains. But that's where I mention it as a Band-Aid, and that to keep on pushing the limits to this crisis situation, I don't feel is tenable anymore for the folks who work for the city and all the folks who depend on the city. We need something more. And that's why diversifying the water resources portfolio and exploring other ideas is key.
So a follow-up question. So with your measurements, you feel comfortable that the city would be safe to pull water from their diversion place up in the Guayanas River into Bradner or Peterson at this point?
Thank you for that. I'm not comfortable saying that just yet, because the measurements that we're taking are looking at environmental standards to maintain the high quality cold water fishery designation. We're not looking at or enforcing drinking water standards. That's something that's trying to stay in my lane and keep the city in their lane. But we're trying to maintain the health of the river for all of its ecosystem services and sharing those data.
But if the water is safe enough for the fish, it's going to be safe enough for us, right? Is that kind of like a...
Okay, I would go on a reach to say if it's safe enough for the fish, then it's probably safe enough that they can pull it and treat it. That would mean it's at a place where it's likely that they can pull it at that point and begin to restore or refill the reservoirs.
And one more comment, I'm very talkative. You talked about various ways to get more water. One of which you didn't mention is that we have the Las Vegas Basin, the brackish water basin, which is a gigantic basin which stretches from about Story Lake past I-25 to KFU and all the way up Mora County. And so I put a bug in the governor's ear, and we want to see if we can build a $50 to $100 million plant to desalinate water, which would solve Las Vegas water problems, because a system like that can easily purify 1 to 1.5 million gallons a day.
Absolutely. Desalination is an idea to explore. It's expensive, and it's got a lot of positives. It doesn't come without any negatives though, because you will be drawing off of some groundwater, and then there will be consequences to having all of those dissolved solids and what to do with those materials. But so it's got positives, but it's got negatives as well. The expense is one of the big negatives.
Dr. Lindline, this is Tina Clayton.
Hi, Tina.
Hi, I have a question for you regarding the skating pond, as it was also considered a reservoir. And many years ago, the Army Corps of Engineers lowered the dam. And so ever since then, the water levels in that pond have never been the same. And actually, it kind of looks like it turned into a wetland instead of a pond. And so do you know if there's any plans or any grants or anything that they can bring back that pond to what it was?
Thank you, Tina. No, I don't know of any grants or plans at this point. I think it is just kind of that holding place for water, but that's not a true reservoir for the city. That was more for, a place for picnicking and something to add to the aesthetic values of the city, but not its drinking water supplies.
Oh, thank you.
All right, does anybody else have any questions for Dr. Lindline?
If no one has any other questions, I'll ask another one.
Sure, Manuel.
I recently read that Highlands University was awarded $20 million for the Water Resources or the National Management Resources Department. Is that true?
Our Natural Resources Management Department has had a handful of grants, including the one I had mentioned a moment ago. Wait, I lost my screen here. Including the one I mentioned a moment ago, where we got a lot of instrumentation for water studies and GIS and geospatial analysis studies. So yeah, we have a lot of grant activities, a lot of things that are giving our students classroom and applied experiences and preparing them for careers to support our natural resources.
I'll look at it again to make sure it was a current article, because they mentioned $20 million and it was just like about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So I thought,
Okay.
great, that's good.
Mhm. And I
Wonderful.
can't go without saying that our partner institution, the New Mexico Forest and Watershed Restoration Institute, they do, Manuel, they too get a lot of money from the state and the federal government, as well as a lot of grant money. And they are so boots on the ground doing things for the communities. And another one of our partners or allied agencies is the Hermits Peak Watershed Association. Leah Knutson and her team, good Lord, what those guys are doing to help maintain and protect the Guyanas River and the Hermits Peak watersheds is incredible. And she and her team have been so gracious in taking on some of our students as interns so they can be in the field as well, learning, practicing, doing, and growing in their knowledge.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Lindline, for that amazing talk. We appreciate it. I believe our next one will start right up at 2. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and have a great rest of your homecoming week.
Thank you, Shauna. Thanks, everybody. It was good to see you.
All right.
And I just want to say, what a great presentation. I'm here in Georgia watching New Mexico, where my roots are. And it's so great to see the efforts and the research being done. Really commend everyone for everything that's going on in this great review of Las Vegas, New Mexico.
Thank you, Amanda. You're so sweet. And I appreciate you tuning in. That was awesome. I'm so happy to see you.
Thanks.
Shayna, she left. I just wanted to ask where this was going to be saved at, Jennifer.
I'll find out, Robert. I'll let you know.
All right, thank you.